Every single day, you and I have a choice. We have a choice between building our own rather petty and limited platforms or leveraging our life for something far greater than that. Now, I remember when I was young dreaming about a platform. We didn't really use language back then, but the idea was the same. Having an audience, right? Having people that looked to you, that admired you. And so, as a young child, I would hear about these teen stars, and they'd come out with albums and come out on TV shows and come out in movies. And I thought, when I'm that age, I'm going to do that. And because I was younger than them, I never really felt threatened by it. Because clearly, by the time I was 13 or 15 or 17 or 19, I was going to be doing that, at least that, if not way more than that. And of course, what I mean by a platform is that I wanted to matter. I wanted to feel like people liked me. I wanted widespread admiration. I wanted to feel like my life meant something. And who doesn't, right? Who doesn't want that? Of course, there are problems with this thinking. One of them is that, well, we can't all be Justin Bieber, can we? Right? When I was young, like I say, I didn't feel threatened by the teen stars because they were older than me. But then something happened, and they were the same age as me. And they were coming out with albums and movies and shows and blogs and books. And then something else happened. They were younger than me. And these teenage pop stars and authors and columnists, they were having a wider impact and a bigger audience. They were making a bigger mark on the world than me. And quite honestly, what happened is I began to feel threatened. And so I did what all of us do when we feel threatened. I changed the narrative. Who needs all that fame? Who wants to be famous? I just need to be loved by the people who are close to me, right? You ever thought that? Who needs all that money? Come on, I would never want that. I just need to make enough to live freely. Yeah? Who needs that wide of an audience? Because after all, with greater power comes greater responsibility. Ever heard that one before? We say, who really thinks fame and fortune is fulfilling? All I need are close relationships with the people close to me. We've all said that before. We've all done that before. And it sounds really good, doesn't it? It's amazing how we'll kind of justify almost anything that we're uncomfortable with. But you know, like I know, that just because we change the narrative, it doesn't mean it stops eating us from the inside. And so, even when I came to terms with never being a teenage pop star, even when I came to terms with the reality of my limited existence, I was still just as tenacious about, don't miss this, building my own platform, even if in seemingly smaller ways. And you know what this is like. In fact, today we actually use that platform. People all the time in business and on social media are trying to build their platforms. We're almost in a platform-obsessed world. Teens, you know what this is like. You are waiting for your break on YouTube. You are just waiting to be one of those social media influencers who actually gets sent a box by a company. You can do your own unboxing video. I mean, wouldn't that be the dream? Or maybe teens, maybe for you it's not so much that, but it's getting that part. It's making that team. It's winning that game with that amazing winning play. Or maybe just winning the attention of that person. But teens, you know what I'm talking about. And I get it. You want to feel like you matter. And so you go about trying to build your own platform. Can I ask you something just between you and me? Isn't it exhausting? Professionals, you know what this is like. You want to increase your influence, maybe increase your profit margins and your income. You want to grow your business. You want to make a name for yourself. You're constantly thinking about how to build your platform. But you know as well, it's exhausting. And it's kind of anxiety producing, isn't it? Always wondering if you've done enough, if you worked long enough, if you've worked hard enough. Parents, you know what this is like, except for you. For you, your platform doesn't depend on spreadsheets It doesn't depend on a product or on marketing. Your platform actually depends on booger-covered toddlers with a will of their own, right? Or that teenager who doesn't come out of her room anymore. And as much as you try to talk to and teach your toddler, he still hits people. She still says mean things. As much as you try to engage that teen, you still overhear her conversations with her peers, and it sounds like, man, she's just drank wholesale the half-truths that culture has sold her. And it feels, after day in and day out, it feels like you're trying to build your platform through your kids, but quite honestly, it's exhausting. It's exhausting because you're always wondering if you've gotten it right. And it's anxiety producing because you always feel like, oh, I don't know if they're going to come out okay. When we try to build our platforms through products we create or through people that we raise, when we spend all of our energy trying to carve out our kingdom, trying to stake out our status in this world, it's utterly exhausting. Anybody with me? It's anxiety producing, and it's precarious. Because here's the other issue. What happens when you build your platform and it doesn't deliver what it promised to deliver? What happens if you become Justin Bieber and it's not everything you thought it would be? In fact, here are his words. A couple years ago, he said this: people see the glam and the amazing stuff, but they don't know the other side. That this life can rip you apart. I would not wish this upon anyone. Isn't that interesting? So, not only is building your platform exhausting and anxiety producing, but it seems like it's not all that fulfilling when finished. And I wouldn't want to live that way. I certainly wouldn't want you to live that way. Unfortunately for us, we don't have to. But it requires us not being shaped by friends and family that are pressuring us to produce. It requires us not being shaped by a culture that tells us that how many followers we have is the value of our lives. It requires being shaped by something far deeper. In fact, by someone far phone. To Philippians chapter 1. Now, this is in the New Testament. It's a letter to the people in a town named Philippi. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, is writing this letter from a jail in Rome. And he writes to this group of Jesus followers, again, in that town called Philippi, that are in a city deeply shaped by platforms. Deeply shaped by pride. Because on one hand, ever since the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, where everybody in the town was given Roman citizenship, their heads have been big. And this is kind of like where, as Americans, you go to another country and people point you out. You're like, oh, they're the obnoxious Americans, right? There's something that kind of runs through the cultural blood of certain people. Well, here in Philippi, there was this big-headed prestige and this pride because, hey, we're Roman citizens, right? And that's hard to come by. But on the other hand, the city of Philippi was a highly sought-after retirement destination for military officials that were fiercely loyal to Rome. And so you can imagine that there's this deep pride that runs through the current of the city that shapes the people of Philippi. And when Paul is in jail in Rome, from his prison cell, when we'd expect him to curse his circumstances, I mean, come on, who wouldn't when you're in jail? He does the exact opposite. He blesses the people of Philippi. If Paul were shaped by the self-absorbing pride, or if Paul were trying to build his own platform, I'm telling you, prison would have plundered his joy. But as we saw last week, it didn't. He blesses the Philippians. Why? Because his joy is unstoppable. Because he falls like this. He says, I want you to know, brothers, that word means brothers and sisters. It's an inclusive term. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. And we're going, Paul, you must have missed the memo. You're in jail. And he's like, no. If you think that this has stopped church planting, if you think this has stopped the kingdom movement of God, then you're following the wrong story. And then he tells us two ways that the impact of the gospel has increased due to his imprisonment. First, in verse 13, he says, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. He's saying, hey, the people I rub shoulders with every day, I never would have met if it weren't for prison. And guess what? I get to talk to them about Jesus. How cool is that? And when I read what Paul wrote, that makes me kind of stop and say, wow, what circumstances in my life or in your life, what unchosen detours, what unforeseen bombshells that dropped into your family or economic situation, what unprepared for circumstances have brought you into new relationships, have made you part of new communities, so that you actually have the greatest divine opportunity coming out of your deepest tragedy. I wonder. You see, Paul forgoes a prideful pity party, and he sees his divine opportunity. And he brings Jesus to all those men and women who never would have heard it without his imprisonment. That's the first way that the gospel has advanced, because of prison. But here's the second way. Verse 14, he says, and most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. I want you to know, friends, boldness breeds boldness. You remember, you're with your friends at the pool, you didn't really want to jump off that high dive, but when you saw your friend go first and jump off the high dive, you found somewhere deep inside the courage to jump off that high dive. You with me? And here, the people are seeing Paul, who's preached the gospel without fear, and now he's actually in prison because of it. And they're like, oh, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. See, prison can't plunder Paul's joy or stop the story that God had begun in his life and through him, because Paul's not living for his own limited platform. Paul's leveraging his life for something far greater than himself. In fact, he's leveraging his life for God's limitless glory. And here's where it gets real. All right, here's where I really want you to drill down with me. In verse 15. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. How many of you know it's easy to do? A lot of things that look churchy, a lot of things that look like ministry, but it's possible to do them for the wrong reason. How many of you know that it's possible to help people grow, help churches grow, do a lot of these sort of ministry-looking things for the wrong motives? This was my story. I grew up in church. I got good at church and Sunday school. I knew what to say. I knew how to look, even when I was serving. But I'm going to tell you something. I was only serving myself. I was building my platform, but using what I knew at the time, which was this local church. I wanted the attention. I wanted the credit. I wanted the praise from people. And I finally began to realize, whoa, I've got this all backwards. I'm making this about myself. But you know how I noticed? You know how I began to finally notice that I was building my platform, even though it looked maybe the other way around? It was when I felt threatened. You want insight into your intentions? Pay attention to when you feel threatened. Because underneath it is what you really are defending. Underneath it lies what you really value, whom you really serve. And so some of Paul's companions, they're out there, they're talking about Jesus, sharing the good news of what he accomplished on the cross and through his resurrection, and they're doing it out of love. They're doing it out of love. But others were doing it out of jealousy. Paul's out of the game. Let's see how many people will listen to me now. But here's the thing. Here's what we see. Paul did not feel threatened by that. He was actually thrilled that Christ was proclaimed. And that's what leveraging your life, that's what leveraging my life for God's glory looks like. And that's why he finishes his thought this way. Verse 18. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed. And in that I rejoice. Now you know, you can fake rejoicing, but really feel threatened inside. But when you refuse to build your platform, when you begin to leverage your life for God's kingdom, you really start to rejoice. I mean, you can really rejoice in anything that actually extends his kingdom. Even the stuff that looks like they're the moments that the tide of faith has gone out in civilization. Even the moments where it feels like a punch to the gut in circumstance and it feels like God may be far from you or far from your friends or far from your friend's marriage, you can know that God is not done. See, Paul refused to be shaped by his self-absorbing pride. And he spoke into a people that were in a city that was deeply shaped by pride. And he speaks to us. He speaks to us in our self-absorbed, hyper-individualistic, platform-obsessed world. And friend, I want you to know that every single day, you and I have the choice to build our petty platforms or to leverage our lives for God's kingdom. And when we settle for our own, as we've already seen, man, it's exhausting because it's an endless pursuit. It's anxiety producing because there are always variables that are unsettled. And you might build it and be completely let down, as we already heard from one celebrity at the top of this morning. But what happened in Paul, this is so important, what happened in Paul freed him from that pursuit. And what happened in the Jesus followers there in Philippi freed them from that pressure cooker that they lived in their context to build a platform and to live with pride and prestige. And I want you to know that the same thing is happening today on so many different levels in the lives of men and women that you know. God is freeing them all the way to the top of the celebrity chain. In fact, just last week, that same Justin Bieber put this on his Instagram. People cannot assign value. They can only recognize it. God is the only one who can assign value. And if God says it, that settles it. You are valuable. Now, if you've been with us for any amount of time, you know I don't really quote from pop stars that often. But this is really key. Because here's a guy who's built his platform, who's got it and realized that it didn't deliver everything it promised. And what he's realized now is that his followers don't define him. What he's realized now is that his platform doesn't validate him. God does. And that, my friends, is not exhausting. That, my friends, does not produce anxiety because it's sure and it's settled. It's freeing. And maybe this is why, before he ever did any miracle, before he ever walked on water, before he ever healed anyone, before he ever did any teaching that would change the world, before any of that, Jesus was affirmed in his identity. And he heard the voice of God that said over him, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. And as long as you choose to build your platform, you will always end up exhausted. There will always be anxiety. In fact, the great lie of our 21st century Western culture is that we can identify however we want, but that's an exhausting endeavor. That's a performance that you have to keep up to sort of prove your identity, whatever that identity is that you choose. It produces anxiety. And quite honestly, it never delivers what it promises to. More on that in week 5. But here's what I want you to know today. That Jesus can give you an identity that makes you fully human and that frees you and frees me from the rat race. Because when he died on the cross, he took to the mat all of those bent and twisted and self-absorbed desires that and he wants to free you and he wants to free me from wondering over and over, am I enough? Am I loved? Where is my identity? He wants to free us from that by declaring over us, this is my beloved son. This is my beloved daughter with whom I am well pleased. And he gets to do that when you choose and when I choose to receive his forgiveness and follow his leadership in our life. And maybe you're at the point of making that decision for the first time ever. Send us an email, send us a message, talk to me afterwards. But here's what I want everyone to do this week. Pay attention to when you feel threatened. Pay attention to when you feel threatened. Pay attention to what it is that makes you feel that way, because that reveals what you think you have to defend. That reveals what you truly value. That reveals, quite honestly, whom you really serve. Let me finish with this. I don't know where our nation is headed. I don't know what awaits us in our post-Christian, Western, American context. I really don't. But as your pastor, I pray and I hope that we become people who are deeply shaped by God, who are deeply shaped by God's word, who are deeply marked by the character of Jesus more than anything else. And so let me share what that might look like. In communist Soviet Union in the 20th century, there was a systematic attempt to eradicate Christianity completely. In fact, some people who grew up there remember going to kindergarten. This is how insidious it was. In kindergarten classrooms, the teacher would hold up a Bible and say, "Hey, boys and girls, has anyone ever seen one of these at home?" And innocently, a boy here, a few girls there would raise their hands. "Oh yeah, I've seen that before." And government officials would go to that family's house by the end of the school day. That's how aggressive this systemic attempt to eradicate Christianity from an entire generation was. And here's how one boy remembers it. He says, "I remember the day like it was yesterday. My father put his arms around me and my sister and my brother and guided us into the kitchen to sit around the table where he could talk with us. My mama was crying, so I knew that something was wrong. Papa didn't look at her because he was talking directly to us. He said, 'Children, you know that I am the pastor of our church. That's what God has called me to do, to tell others about him. I have learned that the communist authorities will come tomorrow to arrest me. They will put me in prison because they want me to stop preaching about Jesus. But I cannot stop doing that because I must obey God. I will miss you very much, but I will trust God to watch over you while I'm gone.' He hugged each one of us. Then he said, 'All around this part of the country, the authorities are rounding up followers of Jesus and demanding that they deny their faith. Sometimes when they refuse, the authorities will line up whole families and hang them by the neck until they are all dead. I don't want that to happen to our family, so I'm praying that once they put me in prison, they will leave you and your mother alone. However, and here the narrator paused and made eye contact with the interviewer. The father said, if I am in prison and I hear that my wife and my children have been hung to death rather than deny Jesus, I will be the most proud man in that prison. Every day, you and I have a choice between building our limited, petty platforms and leveraging our life for God's kingdom. And every day, it begins with seemingly small choices. But as you choose Jesus, you will be free from the exhausting pursuit, the endless endeavor, the anxiety-producing rat race of trying to build your own identity. And every day that you choose Jesus, I want you to know that I will be the proudest pastor in the world. Imagine what we might see. Just us on this live stream here in the room. Imagine what we might see if we let go of our platform obsession. Imagine what might happen when we lean into what seem like setbacks and leverage our life for God's kingdom. Amazing things may happen once again. I want you to pray with me, and then we're going to sing. Why don't you stand? Father, we don't know what awaits us in the near future, whether that's job loss or the loss of a loved one, whether that's an unexpected detour or a deep depression. But God, we know what awaits us in the long run. And we know that your story cannot be stopped. Would you give us the grace in the seemingly small moments of our day to day to choose your kingdom over our platform?